You certainly still stand by the words beyond doubt.
I do, and because at the time that was the judgment that he was led to make. And I would also stand by, I know that the Butt report felt that it overstated things to talk about extensive and detailed and so forth, and authoritative. I stand by that as well, because I think the document had the full authority of the Joint Intelligence Committee. It was detailed, and it wasn't just about the intelligence that had come in the last couple of days, and I think some of the caveats were in there. You could certainly make the point, as both you and Sir Lawrence have now done, that there could have been more in terms of the public presentation, putting over the case about why those caveats were important. But I think ultimately, in terms of what the public would have taken out of it, it wouldn't have made that much difference, because it was a cautiously put case.
So if the JIC assessments, when we are able, perhaps, I don't know if we will be able to publish them, but certainly we read them, were not to correspond to the phrase beyond doubt, and if members of the JIC, and we've already heard somebody who did serve on the JIC, Sir William Ehrman, were to say that beyond doubt was not a phrase that was justifiable, would you at that stage say that Parliament had been misled by the Prime Minister saying beyond doubt?
No, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't. Okay, thank you. Can I just move on to my final point? Again, a broad point arising from what was said this morning. You used the phrase, which I've seen used many times, to describe the threat, the phrase current, serious and credible threat from Iraq. But when the Prime Minister spoke in the debate in Parliament on the 24th of September, when Parliament was reconvened and the dossier had just been put in the library of the House of Commons, he used a different phrase. He said his, meaning Saddam Hussein's, WMD programme is active, detailed and growing. Now, what was the basis, the evidence, for him to tell Parliament that Saddam's programme was growing?
It was within the dossier. It was the story, the narrative that he was setting out within the dossier.
But the dossier doesn't use the word growing.
The dossier may not, but that again is the Prime Minister setting out what he has read from the intelligence that has been presented to him.
But I can't find this concept of growing in...
Well, a step change in his preparations of a ballistic missile programme. That's growing.
We've been through thousands of documents and intelligence reports, and the idea of growing doesn't really appear in them. I mean, if I can quote from your diary for the 23rd of July 2002, again, you record the Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw, as follows. Jack said that of the four powers posing a potential threat with WMD, Iran, Korea, Libya and Iraq, Iraq would be the fourth. He does not have nukes. He has some offensive WMD capability. Now, turning then from that statement by the Foreign Secretary to the dossier referred to Iraq's continuing possession after 1991 of chemical and biological agents. It referred to Saddam's continuing capability to produce them. It referred to his covert attempts to acquire technology and materials which could be used in the production of nuclear weapons. None of that describes Saddam's actual program as growing. So, was it accurate to represent the threat from Iraq at this time as growing?
I've said to you many times this morning that the reason the Prime Minister wanted to put the dossier into the public domain in the way that he did was because he had grown more and more concerned about the threat that Saddam Hussein faced based upon intelligence being presented to him. And yes, there was the unaccounted for, the leftovers and so forth that had been there for an awful long time, which were not inconsiderable in quantity or in effect, but the intelligence picture being presented to him, he assessed as it did show a growing threat, and it certainly led him and the government to be more concerned. Jack Straw, I think, was making a slightly separate point, and he may well have been right if you were going to say which of those four had the most advanced nuclear, chemical and biological weapons programs. But as I said this morning, The Prime Minister did see, I think, Iraq as a unique threat, in part because of the history and its use of chemical weapons, in part because of the means it had deployed to obstruct the United Nations, to conceal the weapons programme, and also because there was no element there that anybody could remotely get into in terms of having any sort of dialogue at all. And he did see that, as I'm sure he'll say when you see him, he did see that as a growing threat.
But this, as you will see, comes back to the point I made earlier as to whether this unique threat had actually been contained since 1991.
But that's a judgment in the end, isn't it?
Or whether it was growing. And I'm trying to find out, it's very important to this inquiry, what that judgment was based on, that it was growing.
The judgment was, look, the Prime Minister is the guy who made the decisions, but I'll say what I think he would say were he here, that the containment policy wasn't working as effectively as it had been, that September 11 had changed the context in terms of how the United States, Britain, other countries were going to address this issue, and that the volume of intelligence that was crossing his desk about this issue was making him more concerned about it.
All of that can be perfectly true without the intelligence saying that the threat is growing. The Prime Minister becoming more and more concerned, as he said in the foreword, increasingly alarmed, the phrase he used, is one thing, but seeing that the threat is growing, as you will understand, is another.
But ultimately, you can present, as the intelligence people do, as the diplomats do, as all the advisors do, they can present all the factual analysis, including all the caveats and all the rest of it, and ultimately the Prime Minister has to make judgments about that, and that's the judgment that he made.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, during the course of the morning, you said that the development of the dossier was important in terms of government communications. It was an innovation. And you also said that these were not normal times. Now, when the decision was taken to have this innovative approach to pushing information out in the public, was consideration given, was there a discussion about the constitutional proprieties that you'll have to consider? Because the cardinal principle of keeping intelligence rigorously separate from those who make decisions is very much embedded in the way constitutional proprieties operate. Now, given your role, because your trade is communications and you were a special advisor with the executive powers, but is getting it wrong with the process for developing this, was that actually discussed? That what would be the proper way of developing this?
Yes.
Because you yourself said that it's a pity because will this happen again? Because this goes to the heart of public trust. Yeah. I mean, these proprieties exist for a reason.
Right.
Was this actually discussed? Did anybody draw these to your attention?
Was it discussed? Yes. Were people aware of its unprecedented nature, and therefore did that increase the level of both of discussion and potential concern? Yes. Was the judgment then reached, including with complete support from the intelligence agencies, that this remained a right and proper thing to do? Yes.
Who did you discuss that with?
With the Prime Minister, with other ministers, with John Scarlett, with other people involved in the process.
Was the Cabinet Secretary involved? I mean, was these things discussed, that this is an innovation?
The Cabinet Secretary would have been involved in the discussions about whether to do something as significant as this right throughout the whole process.
And did anybody draw to your attention what the conventions are?
The conventions, well, it was unprecedented. I mean, you talk about a constitutional...
The convention I'm talking about is keeping intelligence completely separate from decision-making.
No,
and the judgment to sort of put a dossier together with a political forward and the information. Because
it's impossible
because
to say...
you blurred the lines.
Well, I don't think you can say that you blur the lines between intelligence and decision-making. Yes, I think you can say that intelligence became more involved in public communication and public diplomacy than it hitherto had been. That is a development, a response, if you like, to the sort of changing media and political landscape that I talked about earlier. Were we aware that that was a significant change? Of course we were. Were we aware that people might have concerns about that? Of course we were. Was it still, nonetheless, despite its unprecedented nature, despite the fact that this was the intelligence services being asked to do something that maybe they wouldn't normally be expected to do, would the Prime Minister, and I hope the intelligence agencies still say that was the right thing to do? I think the answer to that is yes.
Well,